Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming out on this really dark and stormy night. Little correction from the intro. I'm a former owner of Fuzzy Udder Creamery because I did sell it at the end of May, so that I can focus on horses full time. But I did found that creamery, so you may have seen that cheese around. That's kind of what I used to do. And I didn't get a horse when I was 5. I wish I had. I did get a horse when I was 11. But I've always loved horses a lot. Um, yeah, so raise your hands if you're like a horsey person, just so I get an idea of who's in the room here. So a couple, not too many. And then who here has heard about the Mongol Derby besides just knowing that this talk is about it? Okay, so like about half. So I'm gonna like go over a little bit of like background of like what the Mongol Derby is first, just to like set the scene. So it's the longest and toughest horse race in the world. It's set over 1,000 kilometers across the steppes of Mongolia, in the rural Mongolia. It's a self-navigated self-navigated race, which means that you're using a Garmin GPS, Garmin 64, to navigate from point to point. So what that means is you're putting in a waypoint, and there's like horse stations that are programmed into this by the race directors, and you say, okay, I'm going to go to horse station 1, and you point this thing in the direction. You have to be moving for it to work, and then you choose your route based on what you think the topography is. So it's not like a set course like there would be in an endurance race. And because it's such a long race, you're not just riding one horse, and you're not riding horses from home. You're riding Mongolian horses, and you're riding them 25 miles each, and you're riding about 29 horses during the race. There are 1,500 horses used during this race, and there are hundreds of Mongolians that are working as crew. They are actually using traditional nomadic herders horses for this race, so they're not like special race horses. On any given horse line, you're gonna have 60 horses, and some are like the child's pony of the herding family. Some are like a cherished racehorse that's won tons of awards. Some are just their everyday riding horse, and some are rarely ever ridden. But the average herding family has about 60 horses, and so there's 29 different host families that are hosting these horse stations, allowing this race to happen. The race takes a lot to put on, and what's really cool about it is that every horse that's used in the race the Mongolian herders are paid money for each horse that's used. So it's a way that folks can continue their traditional way of life while doing what they love, which I think is really beautiful. So 29 different horses. There was 43 riders that started the race, of which 25 finished. I came in 13th with another rider, and I don't even know if I can do justice to how much effort it takes to put on a race like this. But it happens every summer, sometime around the end of July, beginning of August. And one of the big parts of doing a race like that is fundraising. You know, if you do a marathon, you want to like make it count for something. So there's a nonprofit that's associated with the race called Steppenhoof, and they give veterinary care to herders out on the steppe. And it was organized by one of the race directors who's from Mongolia. And they do amazing work. So it was a pleasure to fundraise for them and to get to know some of the stories of what they were doing out there. They often do a lot of first aid as well for humans, because when you are hours and hours from a major city, a veterinarian is almost as good as a doctor too. But it's a great organization. The other group that I chose was Bravehearts, and they are the largest therapeutic riding program in the US, and they have a program that is really centered on drawing awareness to suicide prevention in veterans. So veterinarians and veterans were the two organizations that I was fundraising for as part of this. And I had a big GoFundMe campaign. I also raised money for my own race entry fee, but also raised quite a bit of money for Bravehearts and Steppenhoof. The Bravehearts organization puts on these 20-mile rides all over the country called Trail to Zero to kind of draw attention to suicide prevention in veterans. And I will explain why I chose that one in a few slides over. So I always like to start my talks by acknowledging my family, because if my mom and dad hadn't, supported me as a little kid with riding lessons, because I'm from like the city, right outside DC. So they had to try really hard to get me somewhere that was rural enough to ride horses as a kid. And I'm really, really grateful for their support and them not having heart attacks while I was in Mongolia during this race. And also the crew at Fuzzy Udder Creamery, I left Maine for 6 weeks last summer, and as all of you know, if you live in Maine full time, that the summertime is when we are making most of our money, and it's really hard to get away. So I'm internally grateful for the amazing crew and staff that I had there. Some of the staff are still there with the new ownership, so it's a really an amazing business that I have a lot of love for. But it, as you will hear in my story, I've moved on, but I'm really grateful for them being there for me to be able to leave. But my story starts with these people. Some of you may know Caitlin Hunter. She lives in Belfast. She started Appleton Creamery. That's where I worked in 2007. That's where I learned how to make cheese. And she's been my mentor and a great friend for a long time. And I had started Fuzzy Udder, and she was always my mentor. But as she was aging out, she had found Jenny Mae McKenzie, who was going to take over the creamery for her. In 2021, she took her life, and it made a giant hole in our community overnight. Anyone who's dealt with suicide in the community knows that is something that you're never prepared for. It's not, I don't know, not like a normal death, so to speak. It really rips a community apart. Basically, within a matter of a day, Appleton Creamery had to cease to exist. I ended up picking up every single goat on that farm and the livestock guardian dogs that were there, and bringing them to my farm and adding them to my milking herd, basically immediately. And it made me really think a lot about why I was doing what I was doing. Just the kind of loss of Appleton in our community, and then having to like take on so much more. And anyone who knows anything about dairy farming knows that it is like the hardest job that you can possibly do. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but the demands on you financially, mentally, spiritually they're just tough. And I'd been in the industry for 15 years at this point, and I was like, is this where I'm going with my life? If I turn 70 and my hands don't work and I can't milk anymore, is that where I'm going? Or am I going to be so frustrated now that I'm just going to want to end everything? So it made me really think critically about like, what am I doing here? And this was in 2021, so it was also during the pandemic. At that time, I was the president of the Maine Cheese Guild, and I'd spent all of my time and energy and all of my free time building the Maine cheese community, because I was like, I'm really into local food. I really want to see that happen. But there wasn't as many events in 2021 because the pandemic was on, so I spent more time with my horses. I had been gifted these horses in 2011 from a woman who was going to teach me how to do driving. I was working with like training driving horses, because I thought, well, I'm a farmer, I should do driving. That's a practical way to do horses. Because when I was a kid, I always knew I wanted to do horses, but people were like, that's not practical. So I was like, well, maybe I'll do driving horses. So I got these 2 horses, and you can see I really trained them well to drive. No, I ended up just training them to ride because that was my skill set. And I started taking them around to clinics around that same time. There's like this open space in my schedule, and I just had these like kind of deep questions. And it was a Chris Lombard clinic where I just kind of had this moment where I was like, I think I'm supposed to be doing horses. Like I just felt it. And I started finding out as much as I could about horses and healing, and just like, when you're with horses, you feel better. And I started listening to the Journey On podcast with Warwick Schiller, it's a horsey podcast, but it's about how our nervous systems work, because when you're working with horses, they always say they can feel what you're feeling and they mirror you. And I find it very true in all horses I've ever ridden. If I'm in a good place, I'm going to have a good ride. If you go to the barn and you're feeling kind of out of whack, or you've had a bad day, if you bring that to the barn, the horse is going to feel that, and you're going to have a hard time. And that's why I think that therapeutic riding exists, is that horses can connect with us on an emotional level that we can't really do in words. So I started to feel a lot more healed the more time I spent with horses. And then I started listening to this podcast, and on the podcast was a woman named Stevie Delahunt, who lives in Bend, Oregon. And she was talking about the Mongol Derby. And she said, I train people to ride the Mongol Derby. And I was like, wait, like I could sign up for a boot camp and learn how to ride the Mongol Derby? Because that was like, this is for like professional riders, right? Like I am just like a backyard rider. I ride in my free time, which is not very much. So I don't know. I signed up and then I went and saw like on the American Endurance Riders Conference website, I saw that there was like some mentors and some people in the area. So I just started cold calling people like, hey, can I come ride with you? And basically like 2 months later, because I had already been trail riding a bit, so my horses were getting some exercise, I started basically doing conditioning rides with my horses, and I ended up at my first limited distance ride in Maine this is in 2022 at this point. And so this is me at my first Firecracker Horses Across Maine ride. It's in Waterford every year. And it was awesome. And then the next day, the Mongol Derby called me and they were like, oh, we've seen your application. I had an interview and they said, you're in. So I was like, okay, I'm doing it. So I just kept meeting up with people all over the state. And these are two of my favorite riders in the state, Susie Rainheimer and Lisa Levine, who taught me what they knew about endurance riding. And I started to just soak up everything. These are the folks from Horses Across Maine. They're in Oxford. They have a kind of endurance riding club there. And then I ended up in Bend that summer, riding Arabians. And the weirdest thing was that at the same boot camp, the guy on the left is Warwick Schiller. He's the horse trainer who I'm obsessed with this podcast, and he's at the same training with me. You know, this guy's like famous, and I'm like this kid who likes horses and just, you know, I'm supposed to be making cheese, you know? And here he is, and we're learning together because he's training for another crazy horse race in Patagonia, which I'm now also training for because can't get enough. But it's one of those things I like to note it because when you're on the right path in life, things start to happen that are synchronistic, you know? And that's how you know that like you're going in the right direction. You're like, wow, like this is the person I would have most wanted to meet, and here we are learning alongside each other. I was like, I think this is the right thing, even though it seems crazy. Like I'm supposed to be running my business, right? Like not like gallivanting off to Smith Rock in Bend, Oregon. But I realized I really liked Arabian horses. I had ridden one as a kid, but that was it, like just one lesson horse. This is Sonic. He's an Appaloosa Arabian who I think is pretty awesome. So basically on the airplane back or in the airport going back from Bend to Maine that summer, I got on the phone with a woman who had this guy for sale and I bought him. He was a crazy race brain Arab in the Finger Lakes region of New York who was too hot for his owner, and she was looking to rehome him. And I was like, I need something kind of crazy to ride to train for the Mongol Derby. Because if anyone Googles Mongol Derby, if you watch the documentary or any of the footage, you will see lots of bucking horses, lots of like kind of crazy bronc riding. So I knew that I was going to need to up my game as to like what type of riding I was going to train with. And he actually turned out to be the best teacher. I have never ridden a horse as hard to ride as him. But 2 years now I can take him out on trail, and I took him to New York to do a 50-mile ride last week, and no one in New York knows that he's crazy. So, but during the time I was training for the Mongol Derby, he was exactly what I needed to help me get my horse skills up to where they needed to be. And then my friend Lisa told me, if you're gonna go ride the Mongol Derby, you need to go ride with a cowboy out west because you need to learn some different skills. Because I learned the English style, pull on their face, pony club style, which is not gonna cut it in Mongolia, and it doesn't really cut it with horses anyways. It's kind of an outdated style of riding. And I had to learn how to ride without pulling on horse's face. The first thing that the horse I was riding there, Trinto, he's a 4-year-old thoroughbred quarter horse cross from Mountain Black's Ranch in Idaho. I pulled on his face and he bucked me off. And that was in about the first 4 minutes. So I learned real clear. But while I was in Idaho, I learned things like, you know, on the East Coast, we ride on trails and there's like a tunnel of forest. But I'm going to the steppe where there's no trees, and I need to learn to like figure out where to go in a landscape. So what was really cool was with Martin Black, we rode out into the hills of the high desert of Idaho, and it has the same elevation as Mongolia. So it was a really good place to train, and choosing how to go down steep hills, how to look at like a landscape and say, okay, like if I want to go here, how do I traverse that? You know, do I go straight down the hills? Do I go around? Do I go in the gullies? You know, he was teaching me things like, you know, look where the livestock are going, you know, because in Mongolia, there's livestock everywhere. You know, how are they traveling? Are they traveling near water? Here's how you find water, things like that. And then I put the first few rides on some mules, did some colt starting, and then did a little bit of roping and worked with the hot heels. So got a little well-rounded, my first Western style education. And then I really needed to learn galloping too, because also, like, what do you learn in riding lessons as a kid? Not galloping. So I went to a off-the-track thoroughbred rehoming facility in, it's like Townhill, Maryland. And the place is called After the Races. And the woman who runs it, she had done the Mongol Derby a few years back. And so she was happy to have me come and help condition her racehorses, ex-racehorses. And I learned about different speeds of the gallop. I thought gallop was gallop, but apparently there are slow gallops, fast gallops, and hyperspeed gallops. It really is amazing when you are on a horse that knows how to race and it comes alongside another horse that knows how to race. All of a sudden, you're going a lot faster than you had realized was even possible. Because you're like, we're already galloping. What do you mean we can go faster? So that really helped build my confidence. And then the other thing I did that was really important was I started working on my own physical fitness. I had been on the track team in high school, but I hadn't run in 20 years because I had just been like, I don't know, lifting goats and stuff. So I was pretty strong, but my cardio was shit. So I started with, 3-mile runs. 2 years later, I did my first half marathon this May. So I'm sticking with it because it makes me feel better. And then I also did a lot of strength training. I worked with an equestrian fitness coach to work on like the left side of my body who had like a bit of a weakness, because what we're gearing up for is riding 65 plus miles a day for 10 days. So you really want to make sure that your body is in good shape for that kind of ride. And so, I was working on lunges, balance board work, everything I could do to make sure that my body was strong enough to go through this. And the cardio makes a huge deal because you're actually spending a lot of time walking the horse. Because I haven't mentioned yet, but vet checks are a huge part of the race. So when you ride your horse 25 miles, you're going to draw a horse out of a number out of a hat, and you get a random horse. And so you have to choose, like, is this horse a strong horse? Is it a fast horse? Did I get the child's pony? Is he fat? Is he slim? Is he in shape? You don't know. You have to kind of rate that. And as you get that to know that, you're going to know, okay, it's a hot day. I'm going to have to slow down 5 kilometers out from the next horse station so that my horse's heart rate will come down and pass the vet check. Because there's veterinarians at every single horse station, just like every endurance ride across the world, where they're going to have a stethoscope and they're going to listen to the horse's heart. And in this race, it's 56 beats per minute is what they need to pass down to within half an hour. At lots of endurance rides in the US, it's 60 and 64. So they wanted to make sure that when they did this race, especially because the horses are not specifically endurance horses, they're just Mongolian horses and they're really strong. But they wanted to make sure that they were going to not be overrun. But they also check things like gut sounds and whether or not the horse is hydrated. They check their mouth. They check all different sites of their body to make sure that the horses are being taken care of. And if you don't pass the vet check, you will get a penalty. And if you get too many penalties, you're kicked out of the race. So it's really important that we took care of the horses. So I'm going to go over a couple more things that I did to get ready for the race, and then we'll get into the race. I ended up going to several boot camps in Oregon through different times of the year. And I also participated in some long races in Oregon because my horses were ready for 30 miles, but I needed to know what it was like to ride over 65 miles in a day. Because I wanted to know that before I was doing it. So I'm riding Alexander Hamilton here. He's one of Stevie's horses. And on the left, we're at the Grizzly Mountain Ride. It's a 75-mile ride in Oregon in April of 2023. And the one on the right is the Marian Anna Memorial Ride, which is also in Oregon. And that's a 100-mile ride. And we made it to mile 90. He did get pulled for his heart rate at mile 90. But I was like, I just went 90 miles in a day. So I felt pretty good about that. And I had to go back again this year and actually complete that same ride because I didn't want to leave it as that. So I rode Chuck Norris this year in the same 100-mile race. He's an awesome horse too. He's not smiling.
I don't know, I can't tell. But you look pretty happy.
Yeah, I think he's having a good time. He's a really awesome horse. And then I went to Bravehearts because I wanted to meet the people I was fundraising for. They're in right outside Chicago, and Martin Black was doing a clinic there, so I joined them for the week and got to spend a week with the veterans that benefit from that program, and it was amazing. The stories and just the way that program was affecting their lives. What I like about Bravehearts is they take like really nice quality cutting horses for their program. A lot of a lot of the programs that do therapeutic riding have kind of like horses that are real old and kind of on their way out. And this one has like really top-notch horses, so it's way more fun and more dynamic than some of the other places. So I really enjoyed meeting those folks. And then the last kind of conditioning thing I did for myself was I went to a rider biomechanic clinic that was a private clinic in Ohio, and it was with the trainer that trained Stevie Delahunt for when she was riding the Mongol Derby. And that's where I really worked on like, how do you sit a gallop? How do you stay on when things are going to go really wrong? And it was all about leaning back. Basically, like if you watch rodeo riders, they're leaning back. That's the number one way. Like if you get scared and you go into fetal position, you're going to fall over their shoulder. When you Google the Mongol Derby, you'll see that there's these marmot holes that horses will fall in out on the steppe. But what you don't think about is the fact that those horses have been galloping out on the steppe for their entire lives, for hundreds of thousands of years. So they know how to run through marmot holes. You have to trust them, and you have to give them their head and lean back so that you don't fall over their shoulder when they fall in them, because they're going to fall in them and then they're going to hop out and they're going to keep going because they know. And then right before I went to Mongolia, I rode my horse Maggie and my horse Jelly Bean in back-to-back races, 30-mile races at the same Waterford Firecracker ride. So the first one I did was in 2022, and this is 2023. And then packed my bags. I basically spent the whole year trying to curate like what to bring, because we were only allowed to have 5 kilograms, which is 11 pounds of gear with us total. We had a rider weight of like the clothes we were wearing. Everyone had to be less than 85 kilograms, 185 pounds, and then only 11 pounds of stuff. So we have this tiny little sausage roll like saddle bag that goes behind the saddle, and then a like hydration pack, and anything else that we need has to be stuffed into those 2 little things. Sleeping bag, sleeping pad, everything. So med kit, anything that you needed. Food was going to be on the Mongolians, but everything else we had to have. Anti-chafe cream, sunscreen. The sun in Mongolia is insane. And then I got to Mongolia, and the first thing I did was I met up with my Mongolian language teacher, Ayuna, because I had taken Zoom classes the whole year before, almost over a year actually, learning Mongolian on Zoom from Ayuna. So I took her out to lunch or to dinner when I got there, because it was really cool to like get to know someone who was all the way across the world and then meet them in person. So at 9 p.m. every Wednesday night, I was on Zoom with her, and then, because it was 9 a.m. there, because it's a 12-hour time difference. And then the next thing I did was I had to try some fermented mare's milk. It's called areg, and it is such a high sugar milk, mare's milk, that it ferments naturally without any starter culture. So anybody who's into making cheese would think that's pretty cool, because you don't have to add anything. It's just churned a lot in like it can be churned in like a skin bag, or it can be in a barrel. That's milking mares. So in Mongolia, they don't actually ride mares. They just milk them and breed them. They mostly ride geldings, but they also ride stallions. And you can tell that it's a stallion because they never cut their mane, because it is sacred to let their mane grow. They believe the mane has part of their vitality. So the mane is never cut on stallions. So it's a little intimidating on the horse line to see a stallion there. I got to Mongolia a little bit early because I wanted to do the academy that they offered beforehand. I was the only rider in that race that chose to do that. But I felt that like I had a lot of imposter syndrome, because I was like, I'm not a professional rider. Like, I want to at least try galloping on these horses before I like die out there on my own. So on the left is like the first time I ever got on a Mongolian horse, and I'm like, oh man, am I gonna die right now? Like, because you pay all this money to go, and maybe like you get a broken arm in the academy, and then you like train for over a year, and what happens? Like, this happens. I mean, lots of people get injured on the first day of the race, and then that's your shot. So there was a lot of like fear in that, but basically after a few days of riding, I was like, I got this. Like, these horses are awesome. People say about Mongolian horses that they're not like Western horses. You can't snuggle them. They're not cuddly. They're not, the Mongolians don't treat them like that, but it's BS. Like, horses are horses. And I could find the scratchy spots that the horses liked on all of them, and they were all awesome. And I felt like there was maybe, out of like the 40 horses I rode while I was there, there was maybe 2 that were standoffish and were like, don't touch me. So I really thought they were just amazing. And they're small. They're only 11 to 13 hands. but they're so strong. Because imagine if instead of stables, you have the steppe to grow up on. Imagine how strong your joints and your muscles are gonna be if all you're doing is moving around all the time. That's something that we could really learn in the West about how to take care of horses and how to rear them in a way that they're gonna have long, healthy lives. There are also really, really harsh winters there, and there's a lot of natural selection that happens, but it makes them stronger. But before I knew it, we were busing 6 hours out to the steppe. It was kind of crazy to be riding a coach all the way through the grasslands. And then we were greeted with a milk offering. Mongolia still practices a shamanic culture. They also have Lamist Buddhism as well. But the blue ribbon is called a hadag. And they always, at any event, they always offer like milk, and you'll offer the milk up to the sky god Tenger. And it's just a beautiful way to like be welcomed into a place. So that's as soon as we got off the bus. And there are so many interpreters for this race. This is one of my favorite interpreters named Tommy. The coolest thing is it's a really small world. So he's from Arlington, Virginia, which is also where I'm from. Like he's from Mongolia, but he grew up in Arlington because apparently, which I didn't know, but Arlington has the largest population of Mongolians than anywhere else in the world, like outside of Mongolia. And that's my hometown. So I was like, okay, this is just too weird. Like he was like, oh yeah, I grew up in Roslyn. I was like, oh, this is just strange. So anyways, the interpreters were cool. A lot of them, so most of the population lives in Ulaanbaatar, which is the big city. It's the coldest capital city in the world. It's also like the most like smokiest, bad air quality because they still burn coal in their traditional stoves. But what's really cool is that a lot of people working for the race, they're city kids, and they have lost connection with their herding culture. So every summer they get really excited to come and do parts of the Mongol Derby because they go along and they're learning about stuff alongside us. And so that's pretty cool. Just the way a city kid here would be learning about what's going on with horses in the countryside. It was the same thing. But there was a few of them there that were like, oh yeah, I grew up riding in the countryside. So that part was really cool, getting to know them. The start camp was pretty epic. There was these like big rocks that actually in the times when the Lamist monks were being persecuted, they actually fell to their death. And so this is a national park that the race had permission to be in. So we weren't allowed to climb on the rocks because they were sacred. But it felt like a really important place. And you can kind of see the yurt-looking structures are called gers, and that's the traditional Mongolian house, and they actually still live in them out on the steppe. And that was actually where we'll be staying at night during the race because it's a choose your own adventure. So there are horse stations that you can stay at night if you get there by 7 p.m. and riding hours are over. Or if you're nowhere near a horse station, you can find the closest ger and ask them if you can stay the night because they have a traditional culture that appreciates and reveres guests. So we were actually instructed not to give them money because they don't want to erode the culture. And what was really cool is I would watch like drivers of interpreters and the vets would show up at a ger, and the driver is a Mongolian, and he will walk into a ger and just like sit down and just start eating. And like at first I thought that they were like relatives or something, because like in the US, like you wouldn't just like walk into someone's house and start eating, but they would just do that. And I was like, oh no, it's not, they don't know each other. That's just what you do. Like you expect, like it's just mind-blowing, just the cultural differences. I just thought was really cool. And I'll talk more about the homestays in a bit. I just want to show the before picture of all the like clean, happy, unscathed riders. And we did a few more training rides, but by this time I was like feeling pretty confident because I was like, okay, I've been here for a little bit and I get it. This is what the race course looked like. It started like 6 hours west of Ulaanbaatar and ended up about 6 hours east. So each little point is a horse station. And then they gave us these maps that then they said if we wanted to take them with us, they would count as our pack weight. So they were like, I'll just take pictures of them instead, and they would have them at the horse stations for us to look at. But you can see the little red ger pictures are the different horse stations, and then you can see the topography of like you have to choose like, look, there's a bog or a mountain, or you have to like those big mountains, you got to go around them, and then sometimes there'd be a waypoint or like a mandatory road crossing, or cross the road here, or definitely go across this bridge. But for the most part, there was maybe like 4 or 5 of those like mandatory waypoints. For the most part, you're just like horse station 1, horse station 2, and you figure out which way to go. And kind of the strategy that I think makes the most sense is that if you have a slow horse, go straight. Just follow the pink line as straight as you can. I mean, obviously, if it's a huge mountain, go around. But if you have a fast horse, find a road and stay on the road and go fast. And that tend to serve me pretty well. Right before we went on the race, there was a Lamas monk that blessed the bridle that we were given, because everyone had the tack that they would have for the whole race. So you would check your horse out with the vet, and then you would draw a number and get a new horse. So this was the bridle that I had for the race. And I also had been training with the saddle. I had bought it in advance, but they also would give us saddles if you didn't have one. And they're all Franco C endurance saddles that were made specifically for Mongolian-sized horses. They also happen to fit my Arabian, so I actually like the saddle a lot, and I still use it today. And the night before, of course, we had a big cultural gathering, and we got to hear the morinkur, which is the horsehead fiddle. And if you've never heard the horsehead fiddle, you have to YouTube it, because it is the most beautiful sound, and it mimics the sound of horses on the steppe. It's like an old-style 2-string fiddle. It's the instrument in the middle, and actually has a horse's head like carved into the top of it, where the little I don't know the words, the things that you make the strings tighter. And then they had Mongolian long song and throat singing, and then they're also some of the best contortionists in the world come from Mongolia. So that was an amazing little cultural thing to kind of send us off, plus the vodka toast, which is why this was the night before, because the Russians were in Mongolia for a while, because Mongolia is in between Russia and China, so that's the cultural influences, but they've really done a good job of keeping their cultural intact. It rained right before the race. This is the day before our last training ride. I'm just about to get dumped on, and all of our stuff got wet right before we started. And we're like, oh man, we're about to go live for 10 days out on the steppe, and all my stuff is wet. So they put a little wood stove in one of the gares, and we're checking every 5 minutes, is my stuff dry yet? How is this gonna go? But it was a full moon the night before the race started. So I was like, I don't know, I had been envisioning the start line for every day for a year, and it was like, oh my God, I'm here. Final weigh-in happens, and my stuff weighs in. I feel like I had everything I needed. And then they're drawing us in groups down to the horse line. So groups of 5 are going down to the horse line. They're picking, these are the horse lines, like stables. This is their version of stables. They're coming in for an hour during the day, and then 23 hours of the day they're out on the steppe. But this is where they are if you need them. And then we're drawing a number out of a little jar, and then they give us a horse. So I was trying to stay back and not go in one of the first groups of 5, because basically they were helping people get on their horses, and then for the start, everyone's milling around mounted, waiting for the next people to get on, and you don't know if you have a berserk horse that's going to be running around and dump you before you even start. And for some reason, I think the equestrianists who put on this race really like to take the piss out of people, and just they're British, and they just maybe I don't know, watching people suffer. But it's a downhill start. So it's a downhill gallop start. So, and I could see the flags when we got to the camp, and I was like, why? Why are the flags at the top of the hill? But anyways, before I knew it, Shatra was counting back from 10, 9, 8, and all of a sudden we were just going. And you can see I'm leaning back, but I'm holding on for dear life in that poor horse's face. But within a couple of minutes, I was remembered how to ride, and I was fine. And a few minutes later, there's a sheep and goat herd behind me, and I'm in heaven, because I've been milking sheep and goats for the last 17 years, and now I'm in a culture that reveres horses among all else, and there's sheep and goats everywhere. Every family has 300 sheep and goats in addition to their 60 horses. And up north they got yaks and reindeer too. So basically Mongolia is my version of heaven. And then this is the only photo I took the whole race. My phone died coming into horse station 1. So I'm really, really grateful that there were professional photographers that actually took the photos that are in this, because I wouldn't have a very interesting talk if all I had was this was my whole race. That means I didn't have access to my cheat sheet for Mongolian phrases, because although I tried really hard to learn my language, I get stage fright, and I was hoping I could have all my really smart phrases in my head. So I had nothing, no maps, no nothing. I just had this one picture. But we came into horse station 1 after that beautiful chestnut that I was riding, and it was a madhouse. There was most of the riders were there because we had all started at the same time, and not many people were out of the race yet. And so I was like, usually I want to go and like fill my water bottle and get some food and like recharge myself. But I was like, no, I'm going to I'm going to vet out, horse vet out good. There was a bunch of people who had overridden their horses because they hadn't done their homework, and the horses they had penalties. So I get on this Nadam horse, which is the Mongolian race style horse, this chestnut. He's just awesome. You can see him here. I'm just like in love with him. And what I love about getting on, being able to ride the Mongolians racehorses is that the herders love the horse too. And so you get this moment where even though you can't like explain, like, I can't be like, I can say son mur, like good horse, but like I can't really like explain in words how much I love his horse, but it's like he knows that I know because I just rode him. And so anyways, that at horse station when I drew this amazing horse, and we just rocketed, and that's when I really understood when another horse came up alongside us and we were galloping, and we went into that new stage of galloping, and then all of a sudden we were off the like main road and like going through nettles that were like really high. That's like the highest vegetation, but in this part there was even trees, and I felt like we were like whipping through the trees, and it was crazy. And I ended up meeting up with a bunch of riders on that one. And we got through to the next vet station, and I drew this pretty bay. And the first night is cool because we had a photographer near us, so I've got tons of pictures to kind of like guide you through what like a day in the life of this race is like. But basically, this is us riding around like 6:40 p.m. Riding hours close at 7, so we really have to find a place to stay for the night. And this is us just kind of like looking for where to go. We find a little water hole because you want to find water along the way. It's summertime, it's hot. You want to make sure horses are drinking. And these are some other riders, and there's a Mongolian. We're like, hey, like, where are the good gares to stay? Like, do you see any off in the distance? And we ended up asking this guy if we could stay at his gare, and he said yes. So we were able to stay there for the night. That's the Bankhar, is a livestock guardian dog of Mongolia, which if you get near a gare when you're riding and you're not walking, they can chase you. So there was a lot of times where I would be going past a gare and I try to not get close to it, but it was like if you got on the tractor beam of it, the dogs would chase you. So that was kind of exciting. And I don't know, it kind of made it more feel like an adventure because you had to like run from the wild dogs. Well, they weren't wild, but there was one time where I was like riding by myself and there was a swamp and there was like 4 dogs eating on a carcass of like a cow, and they definitely were charging me. And that was like a moment where I was like, okay, you just act on instinct. You're like, I don't even think about how scary this is. But anyways, this guy was nice, and they let us stay at their place. So the first thing we do is we untack the horses and we graze them for an hour, make sure that they get nice full bellies. And then the family was super awesome, and they let us use their horse line. So this is like the best case scenario for the first night because, sometimes you have to hobble your horse and sleep out and hold on to its lead rope all night, or it'll hobble 3 miles away. So we got like the star treatment this first night, and this is what I'm talking about. The guy in the pink is the driver, and he just like sits down to eat, and I thought he was part of the family for a while, but he was just chilling with the interpreter and the photographer. And the man of the house is the guy on the right. Their outfits are called a del. Men and women both wear them. It's the traditional outfit of Mongolia. They're gorgeous. I love the fabrics. But we're eating like boiled sheep. And, as a sheep and goat farmer, I thought the food was not going to be challenging because I eat sheep and goats all the time. But the way that they prepare it is really different than the way that we prepare it. And I actually really struggled. I thought nothing's going to faze me. I got an iron gut. And I didn't get sick or anything. But, what we're eating is like the face of a sheep. And I'm like having to like say thank you and like swallow it. But it was definitely hard. And you don't know how long that boiled sheep part bucket has been sitting out. There's not like there were a couple of gares that did have like generators and solar panels, and I did see like a freezer once, but like they didn't all have refrigeration. But it was the most beautiful sunset. That was the riders I was with that night. And what was cool is the photographer, Shari, she would bring a Polaroid with her, and she would ask the family if they wanted family portraits, and she would do portraits of the family, and then they would put the pictures on their altar because every family has a little altar with photos in the back of the gare. And then the rest of my story is really disjointed because I didn't have an embedded photographer to like nicely tell the story. So now it's just like snippets of the step. So this is on day 2. No, this is the beginning of day 3. But on day 2, it was another super uneventful day except for some dogs chasing. And this white horse that I picked at the end of the day, I for some reason rode him straight into a bog, and then there was a dog chasing us, and that was a little bit stressful. But I ended up meeting up with some other riders, finding a place to camp. Drunken Mongolian did try to like wake me up in the middle of the night because I was sleeping in his truck. And he wanted to go to Ulaanbaatar, and I had to pull all of our stuff out of the truck so he could go at 3 a.m. to Ulaanbaatar, and his wife was like yelling at him. But it was fine. I like went into the house and slept the rest of the night. One of the other riders had lost her horse that morning though, so that sucked for her, but I still had my horse, and she had to like catch a motorcycle ride back to the last horse station to go find another horse. But I was able to ride on with the other rider. But I was trying to pass her in the morning because I was like sick of being with the same rider, because I don't know, like maybe you just get a little loopy when you're out there. And I was like, I need to pass her. And so I was riding a little bit too strong coming into this vet station. And so this is the vet Sarah from Australia, and she's like, his heart rate's 58. And it's getting close to half an hour. So I ended up with a penalty on day 3. So I hadn't had breakfast or dinner the night before, so I went into that really nice gare and got myself a nice meat pocket called horseshore. This is the inside of the gares. How beautiful are they? Filled my water bladder, took a nice long breakfast, which I hadn't been eating much. So I think the horseshore is like the best food that they have there, because it's like an empanada. It's like a little fried meat pie, hand pie. So a lot of times, if you didn't know where you were going to eat the next day, you'd stuff a bunch of those into your pocket, and then you'd be able to eat that for dinner. So there I am stuffing my face. And then this picture is just kind of remind folks of just how much energy these horses have. The Mongolians don't believe in breaking their spirit, so a lot of the horses, when you first get on them, can be quite rough. But a lot of times the Mongolians, herders, the owners of the horses, would offer to get on them first and ride them around in a circle. And so I would often just like see how they did. If they did good and the horse calmed down, then I would get right on it. It would be fine. And once in a while, like maybe a handful, not even a handful, like a couple times, the horse would not calm down, and the rider would, maybe the Mongolian would fall off, and then I would choose a different horse. I'm not trying to die out there. Some of the like horse trainers that were out there riding, they had the ego around that, and they would just get on any horse. But I was like, it's not like you get penalized for redrawing, like I'm not that proud. And then they don't approach their horses on the right side. So you can see when I'm on the right side of the horse, I'm kind of like back. Because the first thing you want to do when you get on them is make sure that like they kind of get used to the saddle pack that's on there, because like they've never had a pack on there. And then those stirrups look nothing like Mongolian stirrups. The saddle looks like nothing like a Mongolian saddle. So it's really nice if they can kind of move around without you on them to kind of get used to that. And then it's nice if the Mongolian will also help you get going. And they were always so nice and so helpful. They often wanted to help tack up. Like we were told we had to tack up ourselves, but a lot of times the Mongolian herders would insist that it's their horse. They wanted to make sure that that they were tacked up correctly. This guy was cool. He was a pacer, which meant that he moved his legs in a different gait than at the trot than other ones. And it was a really hot day, and we found lots of water holes. And there was a lot of cows that we passed, which was really cool. And sometimes you'd see like whole herds of cows and sheep, and sometimes herds of horses, which is really cool. And then sometimes we were crossing random rivers. I think I crossed this river like 6 times because my map reading skills isn't great. And this is coming into horse station 8 on day 3. This is the end of day 3. I got a Grula horse, which I love. They're like a dark dun with like zebra stripes on their hind legs and a dorsal stripe on their back. And then I love this picture because it's the crew doing the social media. So folks at home that were following the race could watch my dot, because I had another Garmin that was smaller than this called the Garmin InReach, and it had a tracker, and it also had a way to message the staff if you had a problem, and an SOS button. But that tracker, we had to have it on at all times when we were moving around. And then people at home could like see where we were in the race and kind of follow along. So that was really cool. And I just think it's amazing. I guess they have Starlink in Mongolia. So even though I didn't have access to anything to talk to anyone, they did. And that's just like one of the water tanks they bring out to give the horses water, because that's one of the best ways you can cool them off is to pour water on them, make sure they drink water. And I always like to shout out to the medics. At any given time, there's 3 medics out there. There were 11 hospitalizations during the race. There's things like broken collarbones, punctured lung, broken ribs, some fingers and wrists and things like that. Lots of food poisoning, dehydration. So, my background's cheesemaker, so I was like, I'm gonna use these hand washing stations, and I didn't get sick. So, wash your hands. Pro tip. And then there's just a lot of pictures of some really beautiful horses. This one was one of my favorites. So when I was a kid, I had a Palomino. So at horse station 10, I pulled a Palomino, and that was pretty awesome. And it was a really hot day, and that was a slow leg. I ended up meeting up with another rider whose horse had gone so slow that I ended up ponying him for my horse, which means that we were trotting, and I was kind of pulling his horse by the lead line, and we were trotting along, and then all of a sudden we were walking, and we walked about 12 kilometers in. That was a nice long day, and we got in, ate some horse shore, drank some sute cha, which is salty milk tea, and headed out on another horse. I don't have any pictures of the next horse, but it was like a rainstorm, and we went out together, and he stopped. The other rider wanted to stop and put his rain gear on, and I was like, these horses are way too fresh. They just want to gallop. Like, this is not a good idea. So I didn't get off my horse, but when he got off his horse, he lost his horse. It ran back to the station. And so I'm like, okay, it's a rainstorm and I am now by myself. So here's me trying to go find a campsite by myself. So I start trotting along, put my big girl pants on. I'm like, I can do this. And then I get out there, and all of a sudden somebody comes up from behind, and it's Lucy. And she's like, hey, let's find a place to camp. So we found a really cool place to camp in the swamps, where we got to play the ankle bone games. There was puppies there, and there was really fun conversations on like Google Translate, because she had a phone, and then they were calling their daughter or their sister in Ulaanbaatar, and like she was like translating, like, what are you guys doing here? Why are you riding horses so far? But they took good care of us, and that they had little toads that were like living in the gear with them underneath the stove, and they were like looking at them and pointing and laughing. And so I always like to say that I like stayed in the swamp with the stove toads. And they were really cute. Yeah, another day, another horse. It starts to blur together at this point. I'm like, I don't even remember. Just draw another horse, get on that horse, and go. But I do remember that every day I loved, every moment I loved it. This place had hot sauce, even though it was the same horse shore. So that was the only hot sauce I saw. And then I just have a couple more stories about some of my favorite things that happened, or favorite and difficult. This was my favorite horse that I rode. He was another Grula. He had a GPS collar on his neck, which I thought was interesting. But his owner is Erdine, and Erdine rode in the 2022 Mongol Derby, and he won it. But he's also a herder. And because he won the Mongol Derby in 2022, they invited him to go to Argentina and ride with the gauchos as like a cultural exchange. So there's this whole cool video about him like hanging out with the gauchos, so you guys should watch it. It's on the Equestrianist website. But anyways, when I get into the station, I'm one of the fifth riders there. And so I'm talking to the race organizer, Eric, and he's like, Erdine's really nervous about you guys coming. He wants to make sure his place looks good. And it was just so cool to think that like this is a traditional Mongolian herder who knows everything about this race because he's ridden it. And here he is so excited to host us. Like that to me like melted my heart. And then I got this strong horse. Like he was kind of big, like you can see. He's like probably one of the biggest horses I rode, and he was strong. He had this like power trot, and we were trotting through the mountains, and I was following. There was a bunch of Pakistani doctors that were also riding, and they were amazing riders. And we were riding through the mountains, and of course they lost me in the mountains. They went and did their own thing, and it starts raining, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not getting off to get my rain jacket on because we know how that goes. So I thought he's kind of chill now. I'm like 3/4 of the way through this leg maybe. So I try to like pull my rain jacket out of my backpack, but I ended up on the ground. But I'm still holding on to him, so I didn't lose him. But we're in a sea of grass, and there's literally nothing out there but grass, just as far as I could see. So I message on my tracker, I'm like, I'm not able to get back on because this horse is way too feisty for me to like have him stand and let me mount him. And there's nowhere for me to like go up against a wall or anything. Like he's wild, so we're walking, but he's sweet, you know? And 7 o'clock rolls around, so I start to put his hobbles on and untack him, and I message the HQ, and they send a vet out, and they're like, you can't camp here. There's no water. There's no one here. So I had to get back on the horse. She held him for me, and I got on just fine, and we rode to a gare. They helped me find a gare. But in the morning, we had another nice long breakfast and a 2-hour penalty. So, but it was okay because, you know, I hadn't eaten dinner the night before or anything. So nice long breakfast was fine. I pulled this guy who apparently he looked a little feisty, and they were like, oh, he's been in the race before. You know, because you'll like at the end of the ride, you'll like write down whether the horse was good or not and say like your feedback. So apparently people had said he was a good horse, but he was slow. So I lost my lead, which, you know, was fine, but had a nice long day going through like a weird gravel pit with this guy because my navigation skills are not the best. But he's kind of cute. And then another day, another chestnut. I don't have any memory of like what station or what ride this was because they give you the photos in like a big jumble and you're like, try to make sense of like what did just happen. But more Sutecha and Horshore for sure. And then some of the riders reading the map at the station. And I'm like, I just follow the pink line. Like, I don't know what these maps are for. I am going to a navigation class on Sunday because I do need to work on my navigation skills because in Patagonia, the mountains are big. Yeah, more cool chestnut horses. And then this guy I pulled, he was trained to rear. So the photographer was like, you know, when I rode the race last year, I pulled that same horse and, you know, he's trained to rear. So don't ask him to rear. I was like, okay, duly noted. But I also learned that he was the child's like favorite horse of that station. And if you look at this picture, he's tiny. So basically, I walked him a lot at the end because I was like, I feel bad that I'm on your back. But he ended up being a sweetheart. This horse, I cried when I gave back to his herder because I think I was getting loopy by day 7. I want to tell you one last story before I bring it in. And this is the story of the stallion. I rode one stallion during this race, and I had never ridden a stallion before in my life, but I don't know if you can tell, he's like kind of short. He's a little weak sauce stallion right there, but he's real pretty. He's got a nice long mane. But as soon as we came out of the station, it was like quite apparent that we weren't going anywhere very fast, and I slowly became the last rider. This is day 8, and I had been like pretty competitive. I was like vying for top 10 there. But he had never cantered with a rider on his back. It was very clear that he was on the forehand in a way that I had never felt in my life. And then we were trotting the slowest trot that I've ever done which is exhausting. And then we were walking, and then we're walking, and this leg was a funny leg. It was the only one we had to go through a town the whole race. And then we had to cross a compulsory bridge after that town. And it's one of those things like in the cartoons where you see something off in the distance and it doesn't get any closer and you're like 2 more hours go by and you're no closer than you were before and you're like, why am I, what is going on? And at one point he just like stops and rolls in the sand it's like a sandy path and I'm like, oh my God, what the hell? You know, so I'm starting to get like anxious, and then I start daydreaming about like, when I get to this town, I'm gonna buy some chips and a beer because I haven't eaten only sheephead for days and meat pie. And so I'm like imagining this, and I get to the town, and the horse is like, what is the town? I don't know how to walk through a town. And there's a herder on his horse, and he's kind of shooing me through the town, like, come on, go. And so then I'm kind of hand walking him through the town, and he's like, I'm like, I chicken out. I'm like, there's no way. I don't want to get kicked out of the race because I'm so late, you know, because I'm so far behind everyone. So I finally, like, the town goes on forever, even though it's a tiny little town, but I'm like, finally get to the other end of it, and there's this big white bridge. Only bridge we have to cross that's like this. At the very end of the bridge is an interpreter on the other side. Like, I think they like made him wait there to make sure that like, because it's like a traffic bridge, so they were probably like, okay, like leave someone who speaks Mongolian there so that like if anything happens, you can like explain why there's a dumb American on this bridge. And my horse is just like not gonna go. He was not gonna take a step. It was like, no way am I gonna cross this bridge, you know, because the other riders probably were in a group before and they like had you know, they could go as a team, or maybe you waited till the next person came and then they like kind of towed you out. But I was like, there's no one here. So eventually, like, he's not supposed to help because it's like, you know, you're not supposed to help anyone in the race, but it's like taking forever. And like, there's like, you know, they got to close the horse station that waiting for me. So he ends up like helping me by like, I get back on the horse and he like leads me out. It's like the walk of shame. And I get across the bridge and it's like still a couple kilometers to the station. So I still have to like push this horse. And we get in and it takes him forever to vet down. Like his pulse, like he pulsed down fine within the half an hour, but he took a while because he wasn't very fit. Like in retrospect, I should have drawn a different horse, but I was looking for horses that were crazy, not for horses that were not crazy. So I didn't think like maybe this horse isn't fit. I should have looked at his feet. They were kind of splayed out, like he'd never run. But anyways, I put him back, very happy to give him back to his owner. I go inside because I want to get some food because it's been like 6 hours on this ride and there's no food. all the people who had been injured are in the blood wagon at this point, like partying and eating all the snacks, and they ate all the food. And so like the Mongolian in there was like, "Oh, do you want us to make you some?" And I was like, "No, I need to go. Like I need to go catch up." And so I just started crying, and it was the only time I cried during the race. But then I like cried for a second. I'm gonna go back out to the horse line. It's a new vet, and I draw number 27. And the herder looks at the vet, and he's like, "27 is no good. You want number 5." And the vet's like, "It doesn't work like that." So then he's like, "Well, draw another one if 27 is no good." So then he picks 32. And the herder's like, "32 is no good. You want number 5." And Angus, bless his heart, he said, "32 sounds like 5." And so I got to ride this herder's favorite Nadam horse. Because think about it, this herder's been waiting all day for somebody to draw number 5, and I'm the last rider. And he signed up for this race for somebody to ride that horse, and he can be like, "Yeah, that's my horse." And yeah, he was right, because I got on that horse and I galloped that whole way so fast that I've actually passed some other riders that had like gone some other way, but I was just following that pink line. It was a flat desert, like there was like stubbly grass and marmot holes, and I just like sat back and let him rip. He did kind of want to go to the right, so I luckily have a lot of upper body strength from being a dairy farmer, so I just kind of like, kind of stir him to the left a little bit. And we got there, caught up with the rest of the pack, and every day you start fresh, so where like it's not like riders go out faster. If you get to the horse station, you all start at the same time the next day. So I was back in the race. During that ride, though, I've heard a crack on my stirrup, and actually had broken one of my stirrups. This is what the last 2 days of my ride looks like. But at that point, I didn't care. I was like, I've come this far. Like, I don't care if I've broken stirrup. Like, I just got some rope from the herder at the next station, and I was happy to throw that away when it was done, though. I did 4 stations on day 9. It was a really fast day because it was cooler, and I crossed through a herd of wild camels. There were 2 hump camels. It was like in the mist. There's just some really beautiful days. Like I can't even tell you how amazing and gorgeous the steppe and so diverse the steppe is. But at horse station 28, I picked a really fast horse again, a galloper, this guy. And even though we had to go around the bog, so it was a little slow at the beginning, I met up with one of the riders that I had ridden with a lot of the legs of the race, like kind of intermittently. His name was Reed, and he was a veteran from the Afghan War, and he had actually had one of his legs blown off in the war. And he rode the whole race with a prosthetic leg, so he was way more badass than me. But we always said that if we met up with each other at the end, so we had ridden different ways around the bog, and we met up at the end, and we said, we're going to canter in. Most people walked in, but we're like, these horses are strong. They're going to vet down fine, and they did. So we got to have a little like canter finish, and that was super fun. But look how little he was, little chestnut guy. Yeah, so they gave us our little blue hot dogs at the end. We got to drink some mare's milk. And then they gave us Dell, so we all got to party hard. You can see some people have some casts on and are a little bit worse for wear, but no one died. Everyone's fine. I think everyone's riding again, all the folks. And then just a shout out to the photographers, Shari Thompson and Kathy Gabriel. This presentation would be way boring if they hadn't taken all these cool pictures. And then I'm just going to speed through my trip to the reindeer land just because it's cool. In the north of Mongolia, I had to go milk reindeer, like I just got to do that as a dairy farmer. But they're known for the Darkhan horses, the Darkhan people in the Hovskal region, and they're like larger and just like amazing. So it was like a 2-day ride out on these horses to get up to the reindeer herders. But I got to meet up with this really cool horse lady who also made all the cool cheeses, because as a cheesemaker, I had to check out the Mongolian cheeses. And I'm just going to speed through these just because they're really cool. Just a 2-day trek to kind of unwind and really see Mongolia for what it is without having to go so fast. And also reindeers are really cool. They live in orts that look like teepees, and that's set up just like a ger, but they can fit that on the backs of the reindeer. And they're just magical, and also make the best Christmas card ever. But yeah, so basically I got back to Maine and, felt like I was forever changed. We had the Maine Cheese Festival like a couple weeks after I got back from Mongolia, and my cheese, the Polar Vortex, won Best in Show, and I was like, that's great. I feel nothing. I felt hollow inside. I was like, I'm just done. So I put the business up for sale and I sold it. This winter I raced in South Africa because I met people from all over the world and they're like, hey, come race in South Africa. And then I also did the Tevis Cup 100-mile ride, which was this summer. It's the hardest 100-mile ride in the world, or arguably. And now I'm training for the Gaucho Derby, and I've got little cards that talk about my GoFundMe and about my travels. I started a new website for my farm. It's called Iron Ledge Farm, and I've started an endurance training program and connecting with horses thing in Whitefield. So happy to take any questions. Thank you guys so much for coming, and yeah, would love to chat. I'm just gonna grab those postcards. So if, folks.
Is there any penalty for wanting to draw a different horse?
No. I mean, if you were doing it like a bunch, they would be like, "Why are like that's dumb," you know. But if like the first night when I knew I wanted to camp, I asked the herder, "Hey, does this horse hobble well?" And he was like, "No." So I chose a different one because you would need, if you don't have a nice place to stay, you might need to hobble the horse. So yeah.
I was just curious about the bog. Were there insects?
There were a lot of grasshoppers.
But they don't bite.
But they weren't
So
in
you
the
didn't
bog.
have to worry about
No.
mosquitoes.
There was nothing annoying. I saw a snake, I saw foxes, toads, all sorts of wildlife, but nothing was problematic. Maine is the worst. We get tough here.
And I was also curious about the fabric or the
The
shiny
gel?
stuff, Chinese influence
Yes,
it looked like.
yes.
So is it silk?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely Chinese influence, for sure. But, you know, Genghis Khan's family did found Beijing, so, you know, Mongol emperor was fast.
I'm curious about the participants, because you said there was one herdsperson
Yes.
the year before.
Yeah, it's
Are
not
there other
normal. It's not
Mongolians?
normal. There was actually two Mongolian herders. So they often will hold like these herder competitions, and then the winners of the competitions will get like an entry to the race. It's part of it is they're gonna win the race if they do it. So it's not exactly made for Mongolians. It's made for people to come and like revere the spirit of the Mongolian horse. So that's more the goal of it. But I think it's cool when they add a Mongolian herder in too.
And so people are participating from all over the world
Yes.
then? Did you say it's a British company
It's a
that
British
runs
company.
it? Oh,
Yeah, but there's tons of Mongolian staff. Like Shatra is like the main organizer, and she's Mongolian.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a really cool way to like bring more money into the local economy, because they must be paying them well, I'm
They
assuming.
pay, yeah,
for
they
that?
pay. Everyone gets paid. All the interpreters and the horses. I mean,
It's a big deal.
wages are not high in Mongolia,
Right.
but they are getting paid, and each horse that's being ridden the herder gets paid for it.
That's really cool. What?
Oh, I think the year I did it was 16,000, or maybe it was 15. It's not cheap.
I'm just curious, the bridles are rope, made of some kind of rope,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And what are the
goat
bits?
hide.
What
Goat-
kind of bits do you have?
Goat
in there?
hide, and it's a snaffle bit. It's just, I usually bring it. I'm sorry I didn't bring it tonight. It's a very rudimentary snaffle bit that does basically nothing, which is fine.
And the other question, I'm from Cape Town. So where in South Africa did you ride?
Moelmannshoek?
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So I did some races at Moelmannshoek, and then that's where I rode. And
How
I also
long?
rode at
What's the distance?
Anthill.
What distance was that?
That ride we did at 25 and wait, no, it was a 25 mile and a 50. I don't know what 80 kilometer, something like that.
Lucky you.
You said you rode a pacer?
Yeah.
What was that leg like if you're used to a normal diagonal stride?
I just kind of looked down and I was like, huh, those legs are moving. So side to side would be moving in unison. So I was like, huh, that looks different. No, just kind of a little bit more rocking. I don't know. I have very little experience with gaited horses, so that
So
was,
you didn't twist up on the neck? Because they're so little, I just wonder. But
yeah. I know very little about gaited horses, but I knew that it's kind of luck of the draw. There's like some gaited horses up in, because they have the widest genetic pool of any horse group, so.
Jesse, do the horses go through a pre-race vet check?
Training?
No, vet check.
Yes.
They
Yes,
do.
Yes,
for
they go through a
soundness.
pre-race vet check, but they also go through pre-race training. So
do.
so Ben, one of the organizers, he's a crew member. He did the race in 2022, and then he was hired back. And he spends the whole summer before the race visiting the herders and going over. He has like a Facebook, like a portfolio of pictures with markings, because the horses don't have names, so they have pictures with identifying markings of all the horses in the race. And so they kind of talk about the horses, they look at their fitness, and they give a fitness plan for all of them. So even though sometimes you get a horse that's not that fit, there is a fitness plan, and the herders are supposed to be conditioning them before the race.
Do any of the horses race another 25 miles, or is it just one and done?
One and done.
One and done, okay, because they look like they had various fitness levels.
They have various fitness levels. So sometimes you have a fast, sometimes they are like proper Nadam horses. And when they're a Nadam horse, they can gallop for 12 miles.
Oh, will you do this race again?
Man, if someone hand me that cash, I'd do it tomorrow. I sold my business, so I used some of the proceeds to pay for the Gaucho Derby, but I now need to like figure out how to make money. So I won't be able to race as often as I'd like to, but there's no prize money. No, you get a cup of mare's milk like everyone else. Yeah. No, you just do it because it's awesome. Well, I had a GoFundMe. That was like how I raised a lot of it, and then just Fuzzy Udder was quite successful. Now I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out how to be a horse trainer. Other people, all different things. There was a couple riders that got sponsored, which is pretty cool. I would love to find a local sponsor. But yeah, people get creative. Some people are just really wealthy, and then other people just really want it. It's everything in between.
Can you tell me what Tenger means, T-E-N-G-R?
Tenger.
Tenger, is that your?
Tenger.
We named our boat that because I saw in the book somewhere it said like fair sky.
He's the sky god. That's the sky god, Tenger.
Okay.
Yeah, so like sky burials was a thing where you would leave the bodies out for Tenger, leave them out for Tenger. Yeah. What is the Gaucho Derby? Thank you for asking. I should have explained it. It is a 500-kilometer race that is set in the south of Argentina in Patagonia, and it takes place every other year. They were going to do it every year, but it's logistically a nightmare to put on, and it ends with the backdrop of Mount Fitzroy, which is the Patagonia clothing line's like label. So epic mountains. It's a more technical race. It's not about speed. You only ride 7 horses, but you have the same number of vet checks. So you have like 26 vet checks, but you're keeping your horse for longer. So it's about survival. You bring your own food. You have more weight because you have like bags you have bigger bags that you bring with you, but you're going slower, and you have to feed yourself. There's no happy Mongolian families to host you. 10. So their summer. So I'm headed down there for a training. I'm leaving in mid-January. And the training is at the end of January, and then the race will commence the following year in January or February. I'm not sure.
Did you say the road stations were not the yurts? Did you say
The horse stations? So the horse stations were the herding families. Like often it was just where those herding families were. So like they are migratory. So during the year they might move depending on how the feed is in the area. Like in the reindeer they move every other month, but in the like more lush regions they move just 4 times a year. So they'll have an encampment with 3 or 4 gares. They would set up an extra gare for the guests, because there'd be more riders at the horse stations. But in general the location was like where they were going to be anyways, and they just route the course there. But there's a couple desert places that they had to set up like special ones, and there was like one big Mongolian family that had a lot of family members, and so there was like 4 stations hosted by the same family, different like uncle, sister, whatever, and they actually had some like mobile vehicles that were set up, and then one of them had a shower. I didn't get to go in it, but yeah, for the most part it's kind of like setting it up traditionally. But then in the desert stretch where there's no water, they had to, because there was no herds in the desert stretch, so they had to put the special site there.
So for bathing, normally they just rivers and.
Yeah, I washed in 2 rivers while I was. Very nice.
Someone on Zoom had a question. Deborah asked, how long is the plane and road trip to get to the start of the race?
Oh, it's a good question. So the plane ride from here is like 10 or 12 hours to Turkey, and then another 10 and 12 hours to Mongolia. And then in Ulaanbaatar, we got on the coach, and it was 6 to 8 hours out to the steppe. And every year the race is in a different location. So, you know, the next year could be a different number. I think it was farther this year than last year. You know, people keep asking that, but I had no way of measuring the temperature. It felt hot. Like I was wearing like a sun shirt, so like, and I was wearing a lot of sunscreen, and I drank 3 liters of water every leg of the race. That was definitely hot. Yeah, it was dry. It was dry heat, so it's really different. Like guessing temperature in Maine is so different than guessing temperature in the dry regions. I did not see any, but I'm sure there are. Wait, there was a bridge that maybe had a railroad track on top of it that I went under, but I didn't see the top of it, so I don't know for sure. I don't know yet. I heard rumors of a few of them, so I'm hoping, yeah. I've been trying to like scour the internet, like finding the hashtags of like, I met up with one person in New York when I was on my way to the race last week. I met up with someone in the Adirondacks who's doing it. So slowly trying to meet those folks around the world, for sure. You know, they do truck in hay from somewhere, so they must be growing hay somewhere because I've seen pictures of hay being brought in. But typically, if it's not a super cold winter, the horses are foraging in the winter because they don't get a ton of snow because it's dry desert climate, but they do get snow. But it's like cold. They have definitely like negative 40-degree days, but for the most part, they eat what's out there. But I know that the government will like send hay to different herding families when it's really bad, but I don't know the ins and outs of that.
These horses shoot?
No, the farriery is a new thing in Mongolia, and actually, what I've heard is it's like so rudimentary at this point, like it wouldn't, like every horse I rode had probably never seen a farrier. But in the racing world, they're adding in like crossbreeds to get more speed on shorter races. So closer to the city, you'll see horses that look like other breeds, and then those ones they would be using shoes for.
You mentioned that you conditioned your body before the race. Like 10 days, this kind of riding is going to really beat up your body. How did you stay limber? I mean, did you do yoga? Did you pay attention to electrolytes?
Yes, all of it. So I started doing daily yoga well over a year before I started training, and I actually continue that on now because it just changed my life and I'm so much happier. During the race itself, I brought a little ball that I could like stretch the like the plantar, like that like muscle that I don't know, tendon. I'm sorry, my anatomy is not good, but it gets really tight. And if you roll that on your foot, I saw another rider had done that the year before, so I brought that with me, and a couple of times I rolled my foot out. I didn't do a ton of stretching because I have to say that like you make a little note for yourself to be like, okay, like take some Tylenol, like put on the clothes you're gonna sleep in, hang up the wet clothes. Like it was like a lot to just do the basics, like fill your water bottle, make sure you put the aqua tabs in so they're purified, like put the anti-chafe cream, Body Glide or chamois butter on so that you don't like, you got a lot of like heat rash because you're just, you're really beating your body up. And definitely there have been people in the past who would like get such bad rubs and chafes on their body that they would have to be out of the race. But that's why I did the 75-mile ride and the 100-mile ride before the race, because I wanted to see what it was like to rip my legs apart in advance. So I did that, and then I learned how to not do that by getting the right outfit. 2 layers of pants. Makes a big difference. I had a layer of wool underneath my riding pants.
Are there any herds of wild horses?
The whole country is full. Actually, when you come in on the airport and you start driving, you just see herds of horses. And when you get into Ulaanbaatar, there are horses on the like center island of the road. It is like and there's statues of horses everywhere. You were basically like, as a horse lover, you're like, I have come to Mecca. It is coming home. Cool. Well, happy to answer any questions individually at the end. Thank you guys so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Jessie. This is wonderful.
Thank you.